Give you thanks for this day. We thank you that we can gather again to study your word as we receive it through 1st and 2nd Kings. We ask that you also be with us during our worship service this morning and our luncheon this afternoon. We give you thanks for all the ways that you bless us now and continue to bless our lives. This we pray in Jesus' name, amen. So this will be our third session on Elijah. So we're going to recall a few things. Let's see, give it a little bit of focus. So on the one hand, the high point of Elijah's prophetic career was that contest that he had on Mount Carmel against the prophets of Baal. So it was 450 prophets of Baal versus one prophet of Yahweh. And the whole goal was to demonstrate to Israel whose God was the true God of Israel. And because Baal was non-existent, if you remember, he never showed up, no matter what the prophets of Baal tried to do. Yahweh, however, posted. Yahweh showed up by means of an all-consuming fire. So Yahweh won the contest. The result was all the people of Israel confessed Yahweh is the true God of Israel. So Elijah then had all the prophets slaughtered, and the 3-year drought was ended. So he's on a big high at the end of that contest. But almost immediately, he hits the low point of his prophetic career. And it's because Jezebel had sworn a vow that she was going to have him killed. So Elijah fled both the northern kingdom of Israel. He went through and fled out of the southern kingdom of Judea, and he ended up down at Mount Horeb, the bottom of the Sinai Peninsula. Mount Horeb is another name for Mount Sinai. He had some connections with Moses. He traveled 40 days and 40 nights to get to the mountain of God. God then appeared to him. So Elijah, however, was in such a funk. If you remember, he just asked to die. He wanted nothing more to do with his call, his mission. But then Yahweh appeared to Elijah via a soft whisper. And Yahweh recommissioned Elijah to anoint the next generation of leaders. So Elijah was now to anoint 2 kings, one of which would replace Ahab and his descendants in the north, and that he was also to commission Elisha as his own successor. So Yahweh is already 2 steps ahead of Elijah, providing for the next generation of leadership. And Yahweh also let Elijah know he wasn't the only one. He was feeling sorry for himself. He thought he was so isolated. And Yahweh told him, I got 7,000 who have not worshiped Baal. So we'll pick it up from there. Elijah went from there and found Elisha, son of Shaphat. He was plowing with 12 pairs of oxen. He was near the 12th pair. Elijah passed by him, threw his robe over him. He left the oxen, ran after Elijah and said, please, let me kiss my father and mother goodbye, then I'll follow you. Elijah said to him, go back. Indeed, what have I done to you? Elisha went back, took his pair of oxen, slaughtered them. He cooked the meat over a fire that he made by burning the harness and yoke. He gave the people meat and they ate. Then he got up and followed Elijah and became his assistant. So now Elijah is obedient. He returns back to Israel. He's now carrying out what Yahweh told him to do. The mantle, it says robe. I should have translated that more, the mantle, because that's, if you see robe or mantle, it's the exact same word in Hebrew. The mantle that Elijah used to hide his face from Yahweh's presence back in verse 13 on Mount Horeb, Elijah now throws that upon Elisha. And that symbolizes the recruitment of Elisha to be his prophetic successor. And we'll have more on that to come. But Elisha is now going to disappear from the narrative. In fact, at the end of First Kings, the narrative is going to go in a couple different directions. We might not, well, we simply don't have time to read every single passage, but we'll try to get the gist of it. So First Kings 20. First Kings 20 might seem to interrupt the Elijah story because Elijah makes no appearance in First Kings. Elisha also not in narrative at First Kings 20. The focus is going to be on two battles and their aftermaths. The battles are between King Ahab, remember the king of Israel, and King Ben-Hadad of Aram. Aram is modern day Syria. There's going to be an unnamed prophet and then a man of God who are going to speak the word of Yahweh to Ahab. So what this demonstrates is that even though Elisha and his successor are not in the narrative at all, Yahweh remains active. He remains involved in the life of Israel and in the life of King Ahab. So the narrative is quite comfortable to have Elijah off stage because Yahweh still is involved. So Yahweh is never exclusively dependent on just one leader. Yahweh continues to act through those whom Yahweh chooses. And that's a pretty consistent theme throughout both the Old and the New Testament. I mean, even when Jesus ascends into heaven, God is not stopped. New leaders are commissioned. So, overview of 1 Kings 20. King Ben-Hadad of Aram invades Israel, lays siege to Samaria, its capital. Facing this superior force, King Ahab capitulates to King Ben-Hadad's tough demands. But then King Ben-Hadad arrogantly makes even harsher demands, putting King Ahab in a really tough spot. So Ahab had already capitulated. He agreed to the harsh terms, and then the king of Aram gives even harsher terms. Though King Ahab never sought it, the word of Yahweh comes not once but twice to King Ahab through this unnamed prophet, and then through a man of God. So we hear. So Ahab's trying to figure out, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? The demands are just too harsh. Then a certain prophet came to King Ahab of Israel and said, "Thus says Yahweh, have you seen all this great multitude? Look," that's the army of Aram. "Look, I'll give it into your hand today, and you shall know that I am Yahweh." Now again, Ahab is not communicated or sought communication with Yahweh at all, so he's kind of at a loss. Ahab says, "By whom?" And the unnamed prophet says, "Thus says Yahweh, by the young men who serve the district governor." Then King Ahab said, "Well, who will begin the battle?" And he answered, "You." Then King Ahab mustered the young men who served the district governor, 232. After them, he mustered all the people of Israel, 7,000. Then the prophet approached the king and said, "Come, strengthen yourself and consider well what you have to do. For in the spring, the king of Aram will come against you." So King Ahab wins an initial victory. Everything seems fine, but the prophet comes back, says, "Hey, Aram's coming back. The king of Aram's coming back." And a man of God approached and said to King of Israel, thus says Yahweh. Because the Arameans have said, Yahweh is a God of the hills, but is not a God of the valleys. Therefore, I'll give you all this great multitude into your hand, and you shall know that I am Yahweh. So twice, though he didn't seek the word of Yahweh, the word of Yahweh comes to Ahab, says, Yahweh is going to deliver the enemy into your hands, and you shall know that I am God of Israel. It happens twice. Ahab wins the two victories, but never does he acknowledge that Yahweh is the God of Israel. So while both of King Ahab's victories were accomplished by the hand of Yahweh, at no time does Ahab recognize Yahweh's accomplishments. He's that blind and recalcitrant. After his second victory, King Ahab negotiates a peace with King Ben Nahabadab, which is to his own personal benefit. So here is the peace they negotiated. Ben Habadab said to Ahab, I'll restore the towns that my father took from your father. You may establish bazaars for yourself in Damascus, as my father did in Samaria. The king of Israel responded, I'll let you go on those terms. So Ahab made a treaty with Ben Habadab and let him go. So Israel's won two victories, even though they were inferior, because Yahweh delivered the enemy into Ahab's hands. Now the two kings make an agreement. Ben Habadab is going to give him towns and economic foothold in Damascus. Ahab says, good deal, I'll take it. So while King Ahab's decisions may have seemed like intelligent royal diplomacy, something much deeper has been at work. Because King Ahab never acknowledges Yahweh's part in the victories, Ahab doesn't realize the victories actually involve total holy war. And just recall the total holy war after Mount Carmel. Elijah has all the prophets of Baal slaughtered. That's the terms of total holy war. That's what Ahab was fighting, but he never realized it because he never recognized Ahab. So Yahweh's severe judgment now rests on King Ahab. Then the prophet, again, this is unnamed prophet, the prophet said to him, thus says Yahweh. You hear chat? That's the third time the unnamed prophet comes, thus says Yahweh, because you've let the man go whom I devoted to destruction, therefore your life shall be for his life, and your people for his people. The king of Israel set out toward home, resentful and sullen, and came to Samaria. So now Yahweh's judgment is on Ahab, because Yahweh had designated the king of Aram for death. Ahab negotiated a peace. He broke the rules. So now we're going to move into 1 Kings 21 and just want to establish the setting. The setting is going to be Jezreel. Jezreel is a valley that leads from the Mediterranean into the Jordan River Valley. And it's a very, very flat, very fruitful. That's the ultimate breadbasket of Israel today, is the Jezreel Valley. And although it's not on this map, right at the head of the Jezreel Valley is the ancient city of Megiddo. In fact, Michelle and I are standing on the mound of Megiddo, looking down the Jezreel Valley. So right away, we got a sullen, pouty Ahab. Later, the following events took place. Naboth the Jezreelite had a vineyard in Israel beside the palace of King Ahab of Samaria. And Ahab said to Naboth, give me your vineyard so that I may have it for a vegetable garden, because it's near my house. I'll give you a better vineyard for it. Or if it seems good to you, I'll give you its value in money. But Naboth said to Ahab, Yahweh forbid that I should give you my ancestral inheritance. Ahab went home resentful and sullen, just like at the end of 20. He's resentful and sullen. He's pouting because of what Naboth the Jezreelite had said to him. For he had said, I will not give you my ancient inheritance. He, Ahab, lay down on his bed, turned away his face, and would not eat. Now, what's going on here? King Ahab and Naboth have very, very different understandings of land. To Ahab, land is a commodity to be bartered. So he says, I'll give you a better vineyard, or hey, I'll pay for it. Land's a commodity. He wants it for a vegetable garden. To Naboth, land is an ancestral gift from Yahweh, who still retains ultimate ownership of the land. So in the theology of Israel, when God brought them into the promised land and Israel conquered the land, God chose where each tribe would settle. And God gave particular land to particular clans in the particular tribal area. So land is a gift from Yahweh. It's not a commodity. That's why you're supposed to retain the land. So Naboth's saying, I can't say you the land. It's my ancestral inheritance. It's a divine gift. And the understanding was that ultimately the land still belonged to Yahweh. The humans that were owning the land were stewarding it. His wife Jezebel, now we get the queen. His wife Jezebel came to him and said, why are you depressed that you'll not eat? And he said to her, because I spoke to Naboth the Jezreelite and said to him, give me your vineyard for money, or else if you prefer, I'll give you another vineyard for it. But he answered, I'll not give you my vineyard. His wife Jezebel said to him, do you now govern Israel? Get up and eat some food. Be cheerful. I will give you the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite. Dun, 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 dun. So in relating what Naboth told Ahab, notice Ahab leaves out the first part. The first thing that Ahab or Naboth said, Yahweh forbid. Ahab never recognizes Yahweh. Now, Queen Jezebel's perspectives. King Ahab governs Israel. To her, it's certainly not Yahweh that governs Israel. And to her, land is not just a commodity. Land is ultimately under the control of royalty. Ultimately, the royal house controls the land. So now she, the queen, will be the one who will give Naboth's vineyard to King Ahab. So now the plot is thickening. How is Jezebel going to be able to give the vineyard to the king? So she sets her plan in motion. So Queen Jezebel wrote letters in Ahab's name, sealed them with his seal. She sent the letters to the elders and the nobles who lived with Naboth in his city. She wrote in the letters, proclaim a feast. Sit Naboth at the head of the assembly. Sit two scoundrels opposite him and have them bring a charge against him, saying, You've cursed God and the king. Then take him out and stone him to death. The men of his city, the elders and the nobles who lived in his city, did as Jezebel had sent word to them. Just as it was written in the letters she had sent to them, they proclaimed a fast, seated Naboth at the head of the assembly. The two scoundrels came in, sat opposite him. The scoundrels brought a charge against Naboth in the presence of the people, saying, Naboth cursed God and the king. So they took him outside the city and stoned him. Then they sent to Jezebel, saying, Naboth has been stoned. He's dead. So the queen uses her power. She has access to the royal seal. So she sends a royal letter to the elders and the nobles of the city. Well, the elders and the nobles are playing political games like you should. You should obey the queen. It's to your advantage. So they set it up. They have the fast. The scoundrels accuse Naboth, and Naboth is stoned to death. So Queen Jezebel uses Yahweh's law in Exodus 22, verse 28. You don't curse God, to accomplish her royal designs. She's eliminated Naboth to secure the vineyard for her husband. That's how the Bible wants us to see how despicable Jezebel is. As soon as Jezebel heard that Naboth had been stoned and was dead, Jezebel said to Ahab, go, take possession of the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite, which he refused to give you for money, for Naboth is not alive, but dead. As soon as Ahab heard that Naboth was dead, Ahab sent out to go down to the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite to take possession of it. As has been case throughout much of history, royalty typically wins and so gets its way. Queen Jezebel gives Naboth's vineyard to her husband as she had promised. And notice, she says nothing about the fact that Naboth was executed on her orders. She leaves some of that out. For his part, Ahab takes possession of Naboth's vineyard, but he makes no inquiry. Well, how did Naboth die? What happened? No. She says, go take possession of the vineyard. He goes take possession of the vineyard. Everything is fine because the elders and the nobles aren't going to say a darn thing because they owe their allegiance to the royal house. So it looks like that's the end of the story, except. Now, then the word of Yahweh came to Elijah the Tishbite, saying, go down to meet King Ahab of Israel, who rules in Samaria. He's now in the vineyard of Naboth, where he's gone to take possession. You shall say to him, thus says Yahweh, in the place where dogs licked up the blood of Naboth, dogs will also lick up your blood. Ahab said to Elijah, have you found me, O my enemy? And he answered, I've found you. Because you've sold yourself to do what's evil in the sight of Yahweh, I will bring disaster on you. I will consume you and will cut off from Ahab every male bond or free in Israel. I'll make your house like the house of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, and like the house of Baasha, son of Ahijah, because you have provoked me to anger and have caused Israel to sin. Also concerning Jezebel, Yahweh said, the dogs will eat Jezebel within the bonds of Jezreel. Anyone belonging to Ahab who dies in the city, the dogs will eat. And anyone who dies in the open country, the birds shall eat. Very vivid judgment. Ahab's house is going to be wiped out. He's going to die a violent death. Jezebel is going to die a violent death. because they have done what is evil. So Jezebel thought she got away with it. She took possession of the vineyard. She gave it to Ahab just as she said she would. Ahab takes possession of it. And it's right then that the word of Yahweh comes to the prophet Elijah. Royalty does not have the final say over Israel. Yahweh has the final say over both royalty and Israel. That is a huge theme throughout the monarchy, both the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom in various parts of the Old Testament. Royalty doesn't have final say. And note, when Yahweh's talking to Elijah, to Yahweh, it's still the vineyard of Naboth. Ahab may have taken possession of it, but it still is part of the ancestral gift of land. Indeed, there was no one like Ahab who sold himself to do what was evil in the sight of Yahweh. Urged on by his wife Jezebel, he acted most abominably in going after idols, as the Amorites had done, whom Yahweh drove out before the Israelites. When Ahab heard those words, he tore his clothes, he put sackcloth over his bare flesh, he fasted, lay in the sackcloth, and went about dejectedly. Then the word of Yahweh came to Elijah the Tishbite. Have you seen how Ahab has humbled himself before me? Because he has humbled himself before me, I will not bring the disaster in his days, but in his son days, I will bring the disaster on his house. So the sackcloth and ashes, that's the sign of repentance. So Ahab humbles himself, although Ahab never even acknowledges or calls out to Yahweh, but he humbles himself. So Yahweh says, okay, the judgment will be meted out, but not during Ahab's life. So King Ahab is not off the hook. Yahweh's annihilation of Ahab's house just won't come during his reign, but will happen during the reign of his son. Now we want to fast forward, want to see the description of the end of the house of Ahab. So we have in Kings 22, we're not going to, Elijah again is not at all in 1 Kings 22, and because of time, we're just going to look at the very end. So Ahab died and was brought to Samaria. They buried the king in Samaria. He died in battle. His blood's throughout his chariot. They washed the chariot by the pool of Samaria. The dogs licked up his blood, and the prostitutes washed themselves in it, according to the word of Yahweh, which Yahweh had spoken. So Ahab, he suffers the judgment in the end. Now in 1 Kings 9 or 2 Kings 9, we want to see Jezebel live for a while. Then Jehu came to Jezreel. Jehu is going to be the next king after Ahab's sons are dead. Then Jehu came to Jezreel. Jezebel heard of it. She painted her eyes, adorned her head, and looked out the window. As Jehu entered the gate, she said, "Is it peace, Zimri, murderer of your master?" Zimri, if you remember a few weeks ago, Zimri was the guy who became king in a palace coup and lasted 7 days. And then Omri killed him, so she's mocking him. He looked up the window and said, "Who is on my side? Who?" 2 or 3 eunuchs looked out at him. He said, "Throw her down." So they threw her down. Some of the blood spattered on the wall and on the horses, which trampled on her. Then he went in and ate and drank. He said, "See to that cursed woman and bury her, for she is a king's daughter." So Jehu wanted her dead, but also, yeah, she's the daughter of the king of Sidon, so I better give her a good burial. Then they went out or he, but when they went out to bury her, they found no more of her than the skull and the feet and the palms of her hand. When they came back and told him, he said, "This is the word of Yahweh, which was spoken by his servant Elijah the Tishbite. In the territory of Jezreel, the dog shall eat the flesh of Jezebel. The corpse of Jezebel shall be like dung on the field in the territory of Jezreel, so that no one can say, 'This is Jezebel.'" So the judgment of against Jezebel is total. Then Jehu came to Samaria. He killed all who were left to Ahab in Samaria until he wiped them out, according to the word of Yahweh that he spoke to Elijah. So the prophecy, the judgment against Ahab, against Jezebel, against Ahab's house has taken place. By the middle of 2 Kings, Ahab's house is no more, and Jehu, who is not a member of Ahab's house, becomes king. That's the totality of the word of the Lord. Now we're going to move into 2 Kings. King Ahaziah. Ahaziah is the oldest son of Ahab. So when Ahab dies, Ahaziah became king. King Ahaziah had fallen through the lattice in his upper chamber in Samaria and lay injured. So he sent messengers telling them, "Go, inquire of Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron. Shall I recover from this injury?" But the angel of Yahweh said to Elijah the Tishbite, "Get up, go to meet the messengers of the king of Samaria and say to them, is it because there's no God in Israel that you're going to inquire of Baal-zebul, the god of Ekron? Now therefore, thus says Yahweh, you shall not leave the bed to which you have gone, but you shall surely die." So Elijah went. So King Ahaziah is following in the footsteps of his mom and his dad, doesn't recognize Yahweh at all. Instead, when he's injured, he seeks information about his recovery from a foreign Baal god. And that name, Baal-zebub, the Zebub in Hebrew is a little iffy, but some had translated it, the ancient Hebrew, as Lord of the Flies. And that's where the name of the novel originates, right out of the Old Testament. So because of the new king's failure to recognize Yahweh, Elijah is once again dispatched to issue Yahweh's word of judgment against a royal member of Ahab's house. So Elijah is going as Yahweh's messenger to deliver a divine message to King Ahaz's messenger. And King Ahaz's messengers have set out to receive a divine message from a foreign god. So you get this meeting of two sets of messengers: Elijah, messenger of Yahweh, the messengers of Ahaziah. The messengers return. Now, the Bible never narrates the scene directly about Elijah coming to the messengers. Instead, the messengers relate the meeting. So the messengers returned to the king, who said to them, "Why have you returned?" And they answered, "There came a man to meet us who said to us, 'Go back to the king who sent you and say to him, thus says Yahweh, is it because there's no God in Israel that you're sending to inquire of Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron? Therefore you shall not leave the bed to which you have gone, but shall surely die.' And he said to them, 'What sort of man was he who came to meet you and told you these things?' And they answered him, 'A hairy man with a leather belt around his waist.' And he said, 'It's Elijah the Tishbite.' So the royal messengers, who were originally loyal to the king, they were going to inquire of Beelzebub, are now loyal to Elijah, even though they don't know his identity. Elijah gave them the message, go tell you the king, and they do. So in fact, they deliver Elijah's message for the king word for word. In the Hebrew, that's not common. So they're very precise to make sure that we understand what the message is. Ironically, though King Ahaziah failed to recognize Yahweh, he immediately recognizes Elijah from the description given to him by his own royal messengers. And notice that description. What sort of man was it that came to meet you and told you these things? They answered, a hairy man with a leather belt around his waist. Fast forward 800 years. Remember a character in the New Testament who is described distinctly as wearing a leather belt around his waist? John the Baptist. Okay. For example, in Mark, very first chapter. Why? Because in especially Matthew and Mark, John the Baptist is the Elijah figure who's the forerunner of the Messiah. So Elijah then is going to loom large in the Gospels. Then the king sent to him a captain of 50 with his 50 men. He went up to Elijah, who was sitting on top of a hill, and said to him, "O man of God, the king says, come down." But Elijah answered the captain of 50, "If I am a man of God, let fire come down from heaven and consume you and your 50. Then fire came down from heaven and consumed him and his 50. Again, the king sent to him another captain of 50 with his 50. He went up and said to him, "O man of God, this is the king's order. Come down quickly." But Elijah answered them, "If I am a man of God, let fire come down from heaven and consume you and your 50. Then the fire of God came down from heaven and consumed him and his 50. Not once, but twice, the king sends a captain with his 50 men to deliver the order to Elijah. Come down from that hill. And evidently, the king wants to talk to Elijah. But instead of obeying the royal order to come down from the hill, Elijah calls down fire from heaven, which consumes the two captains and each of their 50 men. That, of course, recalls on Mount Carmel. Elijah calls fire down and it consumes the altar, the sacrifice, the stones, the water, everything. So let's see. Ahaziah sends a captain with 50 men. They go up to Elijah. They give him the order to come down. Fire comes down and consumes them. The king sends another captain with 50 men. They go up to the hill. The captain gives the order, come down. Elijah calls down fire, consumes all of them. So what do you think is going to happen a third time? Ironically, while both captains recognize Elijah is a man of God, they say man of God, they're clueless as to the heavenly power to which this man of God has access, and it wiped him out. Again, the king sent the captain of a third 50 with his 50. So the third captain of the 50 went up and came and fell on his knees before Elijah. And he treated him, "Oh, man of God, please let my life and the life of these 50 servants of yours be precious in your sight. Look, fire came down from heaven and consumed the two former captains of 50 men with their 50s. But now let my life be precious in your sight." The third captain, group goes up, consumed. Second group goes up, consumed. And I got to go up. I got to figure this out. So while King Ahaziah hasn't learned a lesson from the results of sending the first two captains and their 50 men, the third captain the king sends is most definitely learned about Elijah. He knows all about the fire coming down from heaven and consuming the two former captains and their 50 men. By falling on his knees, he honors Elijah's superior status as a man of God. He begs that his life and the lives of the 50 servants be precious in Elijah's sight. In other words, he's basically saying, please don't turn us into heavenly barbecue. Then the angel of the Lord said to Elijah, go down with him. Do not be afraid of him. So he set out and went down with him to the king and said to him, thus says Yahweh, because you've set messengers to inquire of Beelzebub, the god of Ekron, is it because there's no God of Israel to inquire of his word? Therefore you shall not leave the bed to which you have gone, but you shall surely die. So he died, according to the word of Yahweh that Elijah had spoken. His brother Jehoram succeeded him as king. And in the second year of King Jehoram, son of Jehoshaphat of Judah, because Ahaziah had no son. So after the third guy begged for his life, and evidently fire never came down to consume him, then the angel says, okay, now it's time. Go down the hill. He goes to the king. He delivers the exact same message that the messengers delivered, judgment against Ahaziah, because he went to inquire of a foreign god. He didn't recognize Yahweh as God of Israel. And then he dies. Now, because we need to get to church, we're going to leave it there. So what's going to happen in 4 weeks, the last Sunday in February, we're going to start with the transition from Elijah to Elisha in 2 Kings chapter 2. And then we're going to spend that Sunday and the first 2 Sundays in March, tracing the prophetic mission, the prophetic career of Elisha, Elijah's successor. So thank you. Now we'll go to church.